time, huh? You're so excited for your debut. Oh, look at her. But I love it. Keep doing what you're doing, sweetie. It blew my mind. I've never read anything like it, and it was the first thing I've ever, yeah, just, oh my gosh, I'm like losing my words because I loved it. What up? I'm Sam. There's quite literally no one asking me to do this, but I just think my cat's really cute, and I think she deserves a bigger audience. So yeah, this is Medusa. She's gonna be blomping with us today while I talk about the books I read in February. So most of what I read in February was dictated by just like library due dates. I have so many books out from the library right now, and when a book is due, like when I'm really scrambling to finish a book and it's like it's gonna be due soon, I need to return it. There's this sense of like such smugness when I return the book like right before it's due or like the day it's due. And it's kind of like, you make eye contact with the librarian and you're like, bet you thought this was gonna be late. And then you like slide it to them. There's like that smugness of like, haha, I turned it in on time. But then I was thinking about it, and there's also this sense of smugness of like when you turn it in way before it's due, like you finish it and it still has like months left on the, that you could have kept it checked out. And there's this other sense of smugness that's like, you thought I would need that long? Like, who would need that long to read this book? So I don't really know what that says about me, but those are the thoughts that cross my mind when I am returning books to the library. Okay, so without further ado, the books that I read this month. The first book I read was Local Woman Missing by Mary Kubica. I really liked it, and I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars. The book is about 2 women go missing and a young girl goes missing, all within the span of like a few weeks. And then 11 years later, the young girl returns. So basically the whole book is figuring out like, okay, what actually happened to these women and to this girl? When I finished reading this initially, I really liked this book, and in hindsight, it was like the first thriller I'd read in a long time. So I kind of wonder if it was just like, scratching that itch for me and I was just reminded of how good the thriller genre could be. But I still stand by it. I really liked this. It really scratched that thriller itch for me in an unexpected, but not unrealistic or lazy way. I will say in the beginning, there are multiple narrators and it keeps switching perspective, like every chapter. And at first I was like, geez, Mary, how many freaking people are you gonna make us keep track of? But then once it gets into it, it gets a little easier because you start to actually remember like who's who. And honestly, once I got used to it, I think the multiple narrator thing really lent itself well to sort of all the twists and turns. And I thought that the author did a great job of like weaving all of the narrators' perspectives together to like tell the story and progress the story. My biggest pet peeve with thrillers is when I can guess the twist. So I was pleased that that was not the case with this one. I was not able to guess it, and I really liked it too because there was like multiple twists and I felt like it really just kept twisting and turning. I'm also not a fan of ambiguous endings. I sort of need everything like wrapped up with a neat little bow. And this story, it gave me that. So I appreciated that. So I guess if you do like a little bit of ambiguity at the end, you might not like this one as much. My last bullet point for this book is just me likey. Okay, the next book I read was Home Before Dark by Riley Sager. And this was my first Riley Sager novel. And I gotta say, I was pretty disappointed. So basically the synopsis is that a young woman named Maggie, her father published a book detailing their time living in this reportedly haunted house. And they only lived there for like a few weeks. And her parents never told her like the truth of like, this is what actually happened. They really stood firm by like what was in the book. And the book was published as nonfiction. So they stood by the house is haunted and we had to leave there because you just were not safe there. So now as an adult, she's trying to figure out what actually happened there, what is the truth, and going into this, it was definitely marketed as like a horror, but this definitely had more of a thriller tone to it, and I was going into it wanting horror and I got thriller, and I was kind of underwhelmed by it. I was disappointed. It did have some, twists and that kind of thriller vibe of like trying to figure out what happened and like trying to figure out what's the truth. So I think, maybe my disappointment was mostly just because I was wanting and expecting a horror and I was given a thriller. I ended up giving it 3.5 out of 5 stars. So yeah. The next book I read was Nothing to See Here by Kevin Wilson. And this was sort of a random read for me. I think I had seen a couple booktubers talk about it, but then it actually ended up that I downloaded the app Libby and I embarked on this journey to start listening to audiobooks. And on the Libby app, it's like Get Lucky or whatever, like these titles that are normally really popular are available now for you to borrow right away. And Nothing to See Here was one of them. And I knew it was short and more of a lighthearted story, which is a type of story I wanted to start out with because I wasn't even sure I would be able to listen to audiobooks because I really do not have the mental focus for podcasts. So I was really worried that audiobooks, it would be a similar case where I just wouldn't be able to pay attention. So I wanted to start with a lighthearted, sort of like easy read. I ended up borrowing this book and I really liked it. I think it really served its purpose for me. So basically the synopsis is that Lillian and Madison were best friends in their elite boarding school. Say bye. Bye. Medusa decided that she had some other engagements that she needed to get to, so she is now leaving the video. But that's okay, we loved having her and we're excited for her next cameo. So, Nothing to See Here by Kevin Wilson. So basically, Lily and Madison were best friends in their elite boarding school or like academy in high school. And then Lillian had to leave unexpectedly due to some scandal. So they've been corresponding into adulthood via letters, and now Madison tells her, hey, I need you to come do this job for me. And the job is taking care of her stepchildren who literally light on fire when they get upset. And it's not a metaphor or anything, it's like they literally do. So Lillian basically becomes the nanny for these stepchildren. Oh, hi buddy, you wanna come back? Oh, Medusa got a taste of the limelight and she wants to come back. She literally left the room, but then she came strutting back in. So she wanted to be included again in the video. I think she just didn't like to be up so high. So I have her on a little footstool here with her blanket folded on it, and she is just purring away. So we're going to continue with the books now with Medusa still joining us. How did we get so lucky? So yes, Lillian is the nanny to these stepchildren, and she sort of has to navigate like how to deal with them like bursting into flames every time they get agitated. And they're like 10-year-old kids, so they're like still trying to figure out what they're feeling and why they're feeling it. So it was just a really heartwarming story. It was a wonderful first audiobook for me because the narrator that they selected for the audiobook is apparently like award-winning. So she was phenomenal. The characters were just really endearing. So I think if you're looking for a fun, easy audiobook, I would really check this one out. And I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars. Next, I read Long Way Down by Jason Reynolds. This story follows 15-year-old Will as he's on his way to avenge the death of his brother, who was killed due to gang violence. The whole story is him leaving his house, or leaving like his apartment complex, and taking the elevator down to go kill his brother's killer. And at each floor he stops at, someone from either his past or like someone linked to his brother enters the elevator and sort of gives him a piece of the story that he thinks that he has all figured out. And then like the more people he talks to and interacts with, he realizes he may not know the whole story. So this I also listened to an audiobook, and I highly recommend the audiobook because it was read by the author and the story is written in verse. So the language was just so beautiful, and just having the author read it really lent itself well to the audiobook, I think. This book destroyed me. Medusa has decided again she wants to leave, so why am I surprised that she's a diva? I shouldn't be. So I read this on a road trip, and it was like a 4-hour drive, and I was not prepared for how much this book was going to destroy me. So I was just like sobbing the whole way. And I ended up running out of like fast food napkins from my car to wipe away my tears and snot. So then I had to like really hold it together at the end, which was obviously a bad time. I should have saved some napkins for the end because that was inevitably going to be the hardest part. And then, yeah, so I was just like being strong. Like every time something would happen where I would like want to scream cry, I would be like, okay, stifle it, Sam. You got to save it for the end because you know the end is going to wreck you. Get to the end. It wrecks me. I had to like re-listen to several parts because I was just like sobbing. And like I said, the language is so beautiful, so I didn't want to miss even like a single word. But yeah, now I need to replenish my fast food napkins in my car because I have none. So obviously I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. It was fantastic. It is technically, I think, a young adult novel, but it was beautiful. It tackles a really important issue in a really eloquent, phenomenal way, so I recommend it. Next, I read Bunny by Mona Awad, and this was a really highly anticipated read for me because this is one that's obviously been highly talked about on BookTube, and especially in like within the realm of horror BookTube. So I loved it. For those of you who don't know, it's a pretty wild ride. So a young woman in a MFA program, so Masters of Fine Arts program, she's a writer. Her class in her master's program is they're hard to explain, but basically it's this clique of women who on the surface look very twee and very just like rich white girl, and they all refer to each other as Bunny. This outsider woman kind of gets like sucked into the clique and is basically just questioning reality for the rest of the book. I read this because it was likened to a mix between The Craft, Heathers, and Frankenstein. You had me at The Craft, honestly. But then add in the other two and it's just like, okay, this sounds like it's for me. This book was so surreal and made me question reality the whole time. Is the narrator unreliable? Is she on drugs? Is this a mental illness thing? Or is it just this crazy? Is this actually happening? I love that. I'm really happy with my progression as a reader this month because I'm learning a lot about things I really like. This book had a really similar tone and it made me feel the same way as the movie Mother. Just this sense of like this desperate frustration, a suffocating sense of helplessness, and like you're being pulled under, but there's really no use fighting because no matter how much you kick and scream, you've already lost control. And like things aren't being communicated correctly really was a similar vibe as the movie Mother. So I think if you liked the movie, you should read this book. If you liked this book, you should watch that movie. I thought that the writing was really beautiful. And even though I was dying to know what was going to happen, I found myself really savoring the words. So again, I'm learning a lot about myself as a reader this month because I always thought I was a plot-driven reader. But I'm learning, especially from what I read this month, that I really appreciate language. It's like the language has to be good enough to make me want to stop and read it. I'm not going to just like savor anyone's words. I'm just going to read like a little excerpt that I had saved from the book. So this was from page 190. News of violence escalates. My inbox floods, as it did last summer, with alarming crime alert messages from campus security. Shooting in the early evening, sodomy in the morning, decapitation at 3:30 in the afternoon. I wonder when is a non-beheading time to go out and buy ginger ale. Like, what the heck? I just love that so much. It's just so, I don't even know how to describe it. But obviously, like, that blurb isn't like the most profound writing ever. It just captures the tone so well. It kind of had that same sort of like feeling of nonchalance towards violence as like Heathers did. So I definitely agree that the vibe of Heathers is apparent in this book. Yeah, I loved it. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. I got this from the library, but this is one where when I see it out in the wild, I'm gonna immediately buy it for my personal collection. So a highly coveted position. Okay, next is my favorite thing I read this month. And it honestly is like a strong contender for favorite of the year already. And this is actually a book from 2012 called Threats by Amelia Gray. This book, okay, first I'm just gonna give you a synopsis. David's wife is dead. At least he thinks she's dead, but he can't figure out who killed her or why it had to happen. He's trying to figure out what's happening, but his own sense of reality is kind of warping. He starts finding these threats around his house, like rolled up on little pieces of paper, hidden in his bag of sugar, taped, behind the pieces of wallpaper, just like in a bunch of random places that it's like, how could these have ever gotten here? And he thinks these disturbing threats could be clues to his wife's death, but as he receives more and more, he just becomes more and more confused and things become just muddier and muddier. I just want to read one of the threats, and there's like a lot in the book, so this isn't really spoilery, and this is a threat from the synopsis. So this is one of the threats that David finds. Curl up on my lap. Let me brush your hair with my fingers. I am singing you a lullaby. I am testing for structural weakness in your skull. Like, what the fuck? That's so good. Oh my gosh. I knew it was more horror, and it seems really like a divisive read. Some people, you either really like it or you really don't like it. And I think a lot of people who go into this are just like, they're horror fans and they want horror. And this was just like a wholly unique reading experience. And it is understandably divisive. I listened to the audiobook and it really heightened my experience. At first, I really didn't like the narrator. And I almost was like, maybe I shouldn't listen to it. But then I realized, the reason I don't like the narrator is because she's creeping me out. Her reading and what she's reading is like giving me the creeps. And I was like, so that's supposed to happen, Sam. I obviously stuck with it. After I finished the audiobook, I immediately ordered a physical copy and I'm going to reread it and annotate it. And it's going to be the first book I have ever annotated because I just loved it so much. It blew my mind. I've never read anything like it. And it was the first thing I've ever, oh my gosh, I'm like losing my words because I loved it. This was not by any means an easy read or, easy to listen to because there is a lot of really dense prose. And I had to rewind the audiobook quite a bit because it's one where you have to really pay close attention. And again, it's so masterfully crafted. It's like a work of art. and it's like each word is so specifically chosen and placed. I just didn't want to miss even a little bit of it. So if there was even like a single line where I didn't think I listened well enough, I like went back and like re-listened to it. So that obviously made it a little bit harder to read. And there are a lot of long sections of prose devoted to explaining really mundane processes. David is a dentist, or he was a dentist. So there's quite a lot of talk of dental procedures and not even like gross body horror necessarily. It's literally just like explaining cleaning teeth and stuff. All of chapter 40 was prose devoted to explaining dental processes. And I know that sounds like the most boring shit in the world, but I was honestly riveted. Like, I think Amelia Gray could write about paint drying and it would honestly probably be good. She just has such a way with words and she's so meticulous with her language. It's just mind blowing. Another reason I think you should listen to the audiobook is there are several instances where David, the main character, is listening to voicemails from his deceased wife. And it's a single voicemail that he just keeps listening to. And as the story progresses, you're kind of questioning, obviously, the whole time, like, is he acting this way because he's just like so grief stricken, or is he like unwell, or, you know, what's going on? What's going on with David? As he keeps listening to this voicemail, it could really be interpreted a couple different ways. He's grieving. He misses his wife. He wants to hear her voice. Or he's like, he has these instances where he seems really paranoid. I could almost see him listening to it and being like, that's not really my wife. That was someone, you know, posing as her. That's not really her. You know, he could be guilty. Like, did David kill his wife? I don't know. So as he was listening and kept re-listening to the voicemails, I found myself like really straining to listen because first of all, I was wondering, I wonder if when they had this woman that they chose to narrate say the voicemail, I wonder if they just recorded it once and then just replayed it during like when he replayed it. And that would make the most sense to me. That would be easier for the voice actress, all of that. But then as I was like straining to listen, it did sound a little different each time. So then I was like, dang, I think they actually had her like re-say it each time. And then that sort of like made me feel even more, like I could relate to David even more because I was noticing those subtle differences. And I was like, oh my God, is that really her? You know, I don't know. It just like, it really got into my head in a good way. And I think it helped me to connect with this character who was just like the whole time questioning what's real. I miss my wife. Where is she? Why does she have to go? And I think the voicemails, among a bunch of other parts in the book, really show or really blurred the lines between grief and insanity. And this notion of grief and insanity, you know, maybe they're not so different. And I think that is such an intriguing concept because I think grief can a lot of times look like insanity and it can feel like you're going insane. I think it was just handled so beautifully. Again, normally I hate ambiguous endings, but with the tone of this novel and the way it was written, I kind of just became so wrapped up in the language and how beautifully things were being told, and I became less and less concerned with what actually happened to David's wife. Take that as you will. The story is disquieting and unnerving, and it's not quite thriller, not quite horror. It's almost its own unique genre. As I was looking up like what other people had to say about this book and kind of trying to see like what genre even is this book, I realized this book is technically categorized as literary horror. Do I like literary fiction? Who is she? So yeah, that's why it was like unlike anything I've ever read, because literary horror, it subverts the genres. Just literary fiction in general, I think it's like it's hard to pigeonhole into a single genre. So I loved it. I need to read more literary fiction. I'm just as shocked as you are. And there's one line that I just really connected with. I want to share it with you. It is a really short line. I don't want to share too much because I really want you guys to go out and read it for yourselves. So the sentence I really liked was, for individuals who are technically well, but just a little tired of waiting to see what's next. And I think that is so sad, and I think we can all kind of relate to that in some ways. That's a line that I will definitely be underlining and highlighting and putting its freaking sticky tab by when I annotate this book. So highly recommend this book. Again, it's from 2012, so I'm like a decade late. This book moved me, and I could see it being my favorite of the year. Next, a book I read was one I kind of didn't expect to, but my partner ordered this, and it is Hop by Joshua Barkman. And this is actually a little comic strip, and it was a series of comics written for Inktober. So you know, you see a lot of artists on social media who they'll do like one drawing every day in October. So he basically wrote like one panel of the comic every day in October, and then he compiled it into a little book. So it's obviously very short, so I don't want to spoil too much, but basically it's about two crows who go on a walk and encounter the city from a new perspective. And it's surprisingly heartwarming. I like kind of teared up a little bit at the end. Happy to support a small artist. The artist is also known as False Knees on his social media. I think if you like comics, you should check this one out. Next, I read some Demonslayer. So I read Demonslayer, Stories of Water and Flame. Yay. So the original concept of like Demonslayer, the Demonslayer author is Koyoharu Gotouge. Even though the original concept was by them, the story and art of this was by Ryoji Hirano. So I did notice the art was a little different in this. It was really, really beautiful. This is a set of prequel stories that follow Giyu and Shinobu, who at this point Shinobu is the newly appointed insect Hashira. And Giyu and Shinobu are on, I think, the same mountain that Tanjiro's family lives on. And it's sort of the mission that they go on, I think, immediately before Giyu finds Tanjiro and Nezuko in the sort of like main story. And then the other story follows Rengoku and Mitsuri. I guess I didn't realize this, or I forgot that Mitsuri is Rengoku's pupil and he mentored her as a swordsman or swordsperson. The story follows Mitsuri as she develops her specific breath style. So she's obviously the love Hashira, and it borrows a lot of its movements from flame breathing. And then it also follows Rengoku on the same mission and how he comes to become the Flame Hashira. So this was really good. I just love Demonslayer. The art by Ryoji Hirano was really gorgeous, and I was like surprised and excited by how much gore there actually was. Obviously the action is always just like freaking chef's kiss, but I love that the author doesn't shy away from gore. Part of why I love Demonslayer so much is that it seems like these characters' actions have real weight to them, and they actually, you know, there are consequences to their actions. I feel like with a lot of shonen, the characters are just navigating their worlds under these like huge bulletproof layers of plot armor. And I'm not saying that isn't the case sometimes with Demonslayer, but I definitely think in Demonslayer, the characters' actions have real consequences, and the author is not afraid to brutally harm and kill really beloved characters. So I appreciate that. Yeah, this was 5 out of 5. I love Demonslayer. I'm saving up to buy the full box set, but for right now I was able to purchase the prequel and I loved it. Next, I read something from my physical TBR. Wow, pat on the back. Although it was a manga, so it's like it took me like no time at all to read. But I read Venus in the Blind Spot by Junji Ito. And you know, where Junji Ito stands, he's amazing. He's freaking greatest of all time. But this is a short story compilation, so I had already read about half of these, but it still just like slaps, you know? Junji Ito just like never disappoints. I feel like the lowest I've ever rated any of his books is like 4 stars, but this was a 5. You know, this had a lot of classics, like Billions Alone and Amigara Fault are like classics. I really liked those two. I would say those two are my favorites, along with An Unearthly Love. This did include a few stories that were originally by other authors. The Human Share and An Unearthly Love were originally written by Edogawa Ranpo, and How Love Came to Professor Kurita was originally written by Robert Hichens, and the story was entitled How Love Came to Professor Gildea. Interesting to see some other stories that were not originally by Junji Ito, but obviously with his beautiful art style. One thing I just wanted to note too, which hopefully I don't get in trouble for showing this, but I loved this picture at the end, which this picture is from Master Umez and Me, which is one of the stories from this book. But I just love how it looks like, taken out of context, it looks like Junji Ito is looking at a drawing that he's just drawn and he's like, what the fuck did I just draw? Which, like, honestly, same, but I love it. Keep doing what you're doing, sweetie. And then the last thing I read, I didn't finish. I DNF'd something for the first time this month, which is, like, monumental for me. I mentioned, I think, in my best books of 2021, or, you know, whatever, books I read in 2021, that I don't like to not finish books, but I didn't finish a book, and that was Idaho by Emily Ruskovich. This book is definitely literary fiction, and I went into it thinking it was going to be like Threats by Amelia Gray, more like literary horror. And I wouldn't say that's the case. It's definitely literary fiction with darker themes, but I just couldn't connect with any of the characters, and the writing didn't really stand out to me either. I didn't really find any of the, prose that profound. Yeah, it just didn't really speak to me. So basically the premise is that this woman is married to a man who had a previous marriage and 2 kids, and some tragedy occurred, and basically the wife and kids are no longer in his life. They're no longer in the picture. So you start out following the wife, this new wife, trying to figure out what happened, and the husband really doesn't really like to talk about it, and he's obviously got a lot of grief. He's got a lot of his own stuff going on, so she's trying to figure out what happened. And I mean, that sounds like such a compelling premise, but I just really didn't connect with any of the characters. I don't think it's an objectively bad book. I just think it just really didn't speak to me, and I really couldn't relate to it. I listened to it up to like 39%. Oh, and that's another thing. I listened to it on audiobook, and this was my first experience with an audiobook narrator that I did not like. So I was really trying to give it more of a chance. I didn't want to just DNF it because of the audiobook narrator. But yeah, like I said, even beyond that, I just couldn't connect with the characters. The writing wasn't that great to me. And I found myself dreading having to pick it back up. I don't want to have to push through dread to finish a book. So yeah, I DNF'd it at 39%. After I made the decision to not finish it, I felt like so free. So DNF books, guys, it's freeing. So yeah, that's everything that I read in February. I am already underway reading for my March. I had thought about doing a March TBR, but honestly, I am just like so chaotic. I really like to just read what I'm feeling. Obviously, I am constricted a little bit by my library due dates, starting to sweat a little bit on some of them, but I do like to have the freedom to just pick up what I want to pick up, and I just bought a bunch of new books. So look for a haul video soon, or it's going to be like a book shopping vlog and haul. So I'm inevitably going to want to read a bunch of those bad boys. So yeah, thank you for being here and for listening to me rant incessantly about the books that I read. Thanks. Okay, bye.